Well, it now makes sense why Mark Carney won't release his investments, as it turns out Brookfield Management owns pipelines all over the earth, including Canada, making an enormous carbon footprint, though he wants you to live in the Stone Ages. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. Turns out Mark Carney is heavily invested in pipelines and oil fields and all of the other petrochemicals that you hear him and Stephen Guilbeault talking against. Not only is he heavily invested, he has actually overseen the purchase of a pipeline in the United States, the United States' largest pipeline that runs from Texas to New York, spanning 5,500 miles and moves 100 million gallons of oil every day. It moves it across the United States every day. And then he looks at you and tries to convince you that what's best for us is to not build a pipeline, to not open new markets. I think the conflict of interest has finally come to light. I think that we see that Mark Carney doesn't want people to know until after you've elected him that he has a massive, massive conflict of interest with the oil and gas industry all over the earth, while convincing one of the largest resources of oil and gas in the world to not develop them, leaving us in perpetual poverty and horrible economic positions. I picked this up from Reuters. There will be links in the description. Reuters is claiming that this is an exclusive. Brookfield nears $9 billion plus deal for Colonial pipeline, sources say. Brookfield Asset Management is putting the final touches on a deal to acquire Colonial Pipeline, the largest U.S. fuel transport system, for more than $9 billion, including debt. People familiar with the matter said on Monday the New York-based asset manager has emerged as the winner in the auction process, which the five owners of the pipeline have been running over several months, the sources said, requesting anonymity as the deliberations are confidential. So 5 companies. Now, I want you to appreciate that Reuters does say something interesting. Colonial's pipeline system stretches over 5,500 miles from Houston in Texas to New York's harbor. It moves more than 100 million gallons of fuel daily, including gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, heating oil, according to its website. 100 million gallons a day over the course of 5,500 miles from Texas to New York. Of course, they're moving it from Texas because what happens in Texas, they have a lot of refineries there. And the oil comes in from Saudi Arabia, from the Persian Gulf, sails up the Suez Canal, sails across the earth, lands in Texas, gets offloaded in Texas, and then they ship it to New York, where they need a lot of it because they have such a large population there. This is just one pipeline coming out of Texas. And I tell you, in a minute, I can show you the size and the depth and the breadth of this actual pipeline. This is from Private Equity Insights, and they are talking about this pipeline, this purchase as well. Of course, they're doing it with a shot of Brookfield Place. Who needs Trump Tower when you have Brookfield Place? Brookfield closes in on a $9 billion acquisition of Colonial Pipeline from KKR, CDPQ, and Shell. And that's one of the reasons that, because the Reuters article indicates that there was they wanted privacy, or they didn't want their names mentioned. But this article says that Brookfield Asset Management is nearing the completion of a $9 billion plus acquisition of Colonial Pipeline in what is set to become one of the largest private equity-backed infrastructure transactions in recent years. The Toronto-based investor is finalizing the deal to acquire the 5,500-mile fuel transport network from 5 institutional and private equity owners: Koch Enterprises, KKR, CDPQ, IFM Investors, and Shell. What is really interesting about that is, interesting little side note, CDPQ stands for Caisse de dépôt et placement de Québec, which is the bank. It's a bank in Quebec called Caisse Populaire. It's the provincial bank. It's where all of the people it's where the government keeps their money. So now we can maybe understand why Quebec doesn't think that they need a pipeline running through Quebec. They're already making a lot of money off of the pipelines that the current Prime Minister Carney has invested in. So here's a picture of the line, and I told you there was more to it than just being a straight line. However, this image, the red, shows us going from Houston, Texas, all the way up to New York. Then you have the stub line, which is for different aspects of it, but it's still going along the way that they're going. Then facilities, right? They have junctions, they have stations, they have delivery. Now look at all the green dots. So that's all the fuel that's getting dropped off around the United States for various industries, whether that be businesses, whether that be trucks, cars, electrical generating stations. It doesn't matter. That's where they're selling it. Selling it all over the southern United States, right? And the profits going right into Mark Carney's bonus, right into his pocket. And the province of Quebec as well. You can see they have terminals. You can see where their headquarters is. Now the headquarters, of course, will be in New York because the pipeline is being purchased by Brookfield Management. We know that Brookfield Management was moved by Mark Carney to New York just 6 days after Donald Trump was elected in November. And people might want to say to me, oh, well, he's not looking after it now. Don't go telling me. It takes a long time. You always hear Mark Carney say, well, it's just the opening negotiation. That's because it takes a long time. Don't go trying to convince yourself that this deal went down in the last 60 days. Mark Carney absolutely had a hand in it. And what matters most is that his company has a hand in a lot of pipelines. So if he was so dead against pipelines, why would he even work for a company that has pipelines? Why would he work for a company that boasts to be the largest owner of infrastructure in the world? Why would he tell you, the Canadian population, that he's net zero while all the while making millions upon millions of dollars off of a carbon footprint that you and I could only hope to stamp out in 1,000 years of wood-burning stoves and drag races? This is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, so this is the government, right? And they're talking about the United States remained the world's largest liquefied natural gas exporter in 2024. We can see it from the graph that in 2016, the United States was last out of these 5 countries, which are Australia, Qatar, Russia, and Malaysia. How is it that all of these sanctions are against Russia, and yet they're still the world's 4th largest exporter of liquid natural gas? And Canada, which has, basically an ocean of liquid natural gas, isn't even on the list. Malaysia manufactures more. So we have Malaysia, we have Qatar, we have Australia, we have Russia, we have the United States. That's the globe. That covers every little aspect of it. And we send a lot of our liquid natural gas from pipelines down into the United States. I'm going to come to more of that because this is a really shocking revelation. I zipped over to Brookfield, and this is on their page. We are one of the world's largest infrastructure investors. We own and operate assets across the transportation, data, utilities, midstream sectors with a focus on cash flow stability and resilience. Our portfolio grounded in 120 years. Blah, blah, blah. So we invest in infrastructure and deliver essential goods and services, from the movement of passengers and freight over toll roads and rail, and distribution of products through ports, pipelines, and much more. So they admit that they own pipelines, and that means that Mark Carney works for a company that owns pipelines while he's telling you that pipelines are no good, while he's telling you that pipelines are against his moral fiber and all the things that come out of his mouth, when he tries to convince you that the Qataris that sell all kinds of liquid natural gas to both Germany and I believe it's France, somehow Europe is going green. I don't believe any of that anymore since I looked at this. What I believe is a man that's, pulling the wool over our eyes. It's saying one thing but doing it completely opposite, and that's why he gets so testy when people ask him about his conflict of interest. That's why he says, don't worry about it, I'll tell you what they are in 6 months. And it's a blind trust, like he wouldn't know that this is going on. Now, I did a report a little while ago how Brookfield Management cut down 9,000 hectares in the Brazilian rainforest just in last October, I believe. And here we can see from Brookfield's main page again, natural gas pipeline accounting for more than half of Brazil's natural gas demand. In 2017, Brookfield-led consortium acquired 90% stake in a Brazilian gas company called NTS. NTS is a well-located natural gas transportation system that spans more than 2,000 kilometers and connects key markets in Brazil, including Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais. These states alone account for more than 50% of Brazil's natural gas demand. And here we can see that the natural gas pipeline network in Brazil has a capacity for 158.2 million cubic meters of gas per day. Interestingly enough, in 2021, Brookfield had made so much money that they were able to buy the remaining 10% and now own the pipeline outright. I'm curious as to why the Liberal Party and Mark Carney are always trying to convince us that there's no market for LNG, and yet it seems that he owns LNG infrastructure all over the world. Now, if all of that wasn't bad enough, if all of that wasn't enough to convince you that Mark Carney is not being honest with Canadians and that he has no intention of building our infrastructure to the point we are all become good jobs and have millions of dollars in inexpensive food, an abundance of food and all of the things that we require, abundance of housing, so many things that we need. I have an article here from October 2021. Brookfield Infrastructure completes a $16 billion strategic acquisition of Inter Pipeline. Remember that, Inter Pipeline. On October 28, 2001, Brookfield Infrastructure Partners, together with institutional partners, completed a strategic acquisition of Interpersonal Pipeline, IPL, in a deal valued approximately $16 billion, and that was 4 years ago. The transaction was initiated by unsolicited offer by way of takeover bid to acquire all of the outstanding common shares of IPL for a combination of cash proceeds and shares in the Brookfield-related entity, accumulating in the acquisition of Brookfield and all of the remaining outstanding shares of IPL by way of subsequent acquisition transition pursuant to statutory court-approved plan of arrangement under the Business Corporation Act of Alberta. Now, for those of you that didn't understand what I just said there, Brookfield said, we're buying your company because you're publicly traded. We're going to just start acquiring all the shares, and we're going to take over the mantle. We're going to take over control. This is in 2021. This is called a hostile takeover, and it happens quite a bit. And the plan was, we'll find the shares are valued at this, and we will give everybody this much money. And if you take that money, we will give you this little bit of a bonus. And they put it in front of a judge, and this judge happened to be in Alberta. And you're thinking in your mind, why on earth would they be buying this pipeline, this Inter Pipeline, and having this discussion in front of an Alberta judge, which is in Canada, as many of you are probably aware? Well, it turns out that they are in Canada. Our business segments, Inter Pipeline is committed to operational excellence, investing in high quality core businesses, and being a responsible member of communities that we work and live in. Our owner, Inter Pipeline, is a Brookfield Infrastructure Portfolio Company. Read more about Brookfield here, and I think we know enough about Brookfield to understand where I'm going with this. But just because I wanted to bring it home, I looked at this. I said, oh, look, marketing heartland, which is typically food, by the way, facilities and infrastructure, and transportation. And I thought, well, let me have a look at a couple of these. Transportation. Inter Pipeline's transportation segment consists of long-haul and conventional pipelines, as well as bulk liquid storage facilities. So not only is he moving it around, but he's keeping it in place so that you can buy it at the gas station later. Here we can see that in total we operate 7 pipeline systems, 7, that gather petroleum products from producing sites in Alberta, Saskatchewan, for delivery to market hubs primarily in Edmonton, Alberta. Long-haul pipelines include Coal Lake Corridor Polaris system, with transportation systems provided by shippers pursuant to long-term cost of service contracts and have defined annual capital fee and recovery. What I want you to hear there is that he owns 7 pipelines in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. And now he doesn't want any other pipelines built. And don't go trying to convince yourself that he's not already part of this. Don't go telling yourself that he doesn't have friends at Brookfield, that he doesn't know all of this is going on. That would be so naive of you. Brookfield announces appointment of Mark Carney as vice chair and head of ESG Impact Fund Investment. That was in 2020. So he was already rising in Brookfield in 2020, and this happened in 2021, and the other purchases happened in 2021. Facilities infrastructure is the last part that I want to show you because it's very interesting with some of the things that they say here. Inter Pipeline owns and operates assets that provide NGL and off-gas fractionation is provided through interest in Cochrane extraction plant, as well as integrated off-gas assets, including Redwater, Olfink Fractioner, Pioneer 1 and Pioneer 2 processing facilities located near Fort McMurray, Alberta, and the Boreal pipeline that connects these facilities. Now, why did I tell you that? Well, so it turns out that not only does Mark Carney's business, and did Mark Carney not partake in a company that owns most of the pipelines in the free world, they own refineries as well. Now we're talking about a massive conflict of interest. You're telling Alberta that they can't put together a single pipeline, that they can't get one to run through Quebec, that they can't get one running anywhere. And it turns out that's because the ones that are currently in place in Canada are controlled by you and your friends. You want us to believe that that's not a conflict of interest. You want Canadians to tell ourselves that, oh, no. I mean, he won't tell us what the conflicts are. And every time I turn around, it's something about what he has to say that doesn't make any sense. He's making millions of dollars off petrochemicals, off of fossil fuels and pipelines all over the world. But he wants Canada to not touch any of their resources. He wants Canada to only use his pipelines to move their products so that he can get rich while the rest of us have to go green, living on, grass roofs and dirt floors. We're all huddled together in the middle of the winter because we need warmth. While Mark Carney and his friends, his billionaire friends, his companies that control most of the oil transporting through the Western Hemisphere, get rich and rich and rich. And then what? Are they hoping that we'll become so poor that we won't notice that he built a new pipeline with all of his resources and just took control of more of the natural resources so that he can become a sheik, so that he can become one of these oil barons that we hear so much about at the expense of the Canadian population, at the expense of the Canadian voting people, at the expense of Canadians? He's going to get richer and richer and richer, and we're going to get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier, all the while trying to convince you that he's going net zero. Net zero. He literally owns the largest two pipelines in North America and the largest pipeline in Brazil. Net zero? Yeah, I can see a zero in all of this, but it certainly isn't how much money Mark Carney's making. There's 10 or 12 zeros at the end of it. And the zero that goes at the front of our dollars because we're not making any money. This is an enormous conflict of interest. This is an enormous deception on the part of the Liberal Party and Mark Carney. And in my opinion, anyone who thinks that this is something that can be overlooked is simply too ideological, too driven to try and harm other people with their vote to be trusted with their vote. I mean, let's be straightforward. There's no way in the world that earning more money in this country doesn't help every single solitary person, no matter what political stripe, no matter what they walk under. But if you allow only one person to earn all of that money, then the rest of us will be frozen out. The middle class will die a slow, painful death, and the rest of us will end up Canada will turn into one of those countries that you always see where, like a banana republic, where 15 people got all the money and all of the resources and all of everything else, and the rest of us are scrapping around in tin roof huts. We've been sharing the same house for 5 generations, and all of the stuff that comes out of our body runs down a sand drain and runs out into the street so we can step over it on our way to our miserable little job where none of us have a car, so we all have to walk. I mean, it's not hard to see where this future ends up, and we can't, as Canadians, stand idly by and allow that to happen. Can we allow that to happen? Is that the kind of thing that you would allow to happen? Is that the kind of thing that you want to permit to happen? Or are you hoping that you can be one of those people that can sponge off the rest of us? Is that the idea? Are you going to be one of the people that helps destroy the freedom and the dream of Canada so that you can have a few dollars? and the rest of us have to do without? You're okay with that level of suffering, so then you're going to cast your vote on with Mark Carney? It's a very strange position to stand in, screaming about virtue, screaming about net zero, screaming about all of these things, and meanwhile, you're getting fat off the cow of the petroleum fossil fuel industry. That's just my opinion. You can let me know what your opinion is down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.